The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Sell-Side Customer Diligence, Enhance Your Portfolio Sale Price. This webinar is presented to you in partnership with Strategex. You can use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your GoToWebinar toolbar to ask any questions. These questions will be monitored, and our presenter will answer as many possible during or after today's presentation. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted on acg.org's website, along with the slides from today's presentation. Thank you again for joining us. Now I will turn it over to Tom Tabor from Strategex.
Thank you, Kelly. Good morning or afternoon, everyone, depending on where you're located. Again, my name is Tom Tabor, Managing Director at Strategex. We're a firm that specializes in voice of the customer studies for both corporate clients, also for private equity firms. Joining me is Kay Cruz, and she'll be speaking with you in a minute. She's a vice president in our firm that leads a number of engagements. The subject of customer due diligence is something you're probably aware of, and if many of you have been on the buy side, have done some of this. Customer interviews of some form or fashion are fairly common in the due diligence process. What we want to introduce you today, though, is kind of going at it from the opposite direction, from the sell side. The idea of doing customer due diligence in preparation for the sale. There are many uses and applications for it, and in some parts of the world, particularly Europe, it's a common practice. We hope to bring that to you today and share how it's done and some of the background to it. By way of background, just very, very briefly, who we are and what we do. Again, based in Chicago, we've been in business for 25 years, specialize in business-to-business client work, both for corporate clients as well as private equity firms. Mid-sized firm, about 50 employees, done 700 engagements, 60 to 70 plus a year, both domestic and international. We've got a team of dedicated researchers and analysts, et cetera, and last year we did nearly 4,000 interviews on behalf of various clients. What we're going to talk about is we're going to go through a few things. Number one is just make sure we're on the same page in terms of what customer due diligence is, a quick definition of what it is, and then talk about its application. Why you do it in the first place, what the value is, how you go about doing it, the mechanics of it, and when you do it, the timing of it. So Kay will walk through a number of those slides, and then we're going to circle back and show you a real-life case study, which I think will make it very compelling as to the real value added here, because it truly is potentially a significant way of adding value on the sell side of a deal. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kay and let you take it away.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody, or good morning, as the case may be. This is, of course, we've all well recognized that multiples are now at an all-time high, but evidently that must go back to the first century, because everything is only worth what a purchaser will pay for it. And certainly from the standpoint of the buy side, their number one issue is it worth it? And that's what we'll talk about when we look at due diligence through this lens. We often say that in a business-to-business transaction, this is actually a quote from a client of ours, the customer relationships are really the ones that drive the most amount of value. And that, of course, is what buyers are most anxious to find, is what is going on with the customer relationships, particularly if there's concentration. Are the customers secure? Are they loyal? Are they satisfied with what's going on with the company? So again, we're going to look through this lens of that value of driver being the customer. So importantly, most of the time, commercial due diligence takes a look at basically secondary research, some check-the-box interviews, but it tends to focus on market size, category growth, any kind of trends that are going on, a little bit of competitive landscaping, looking at some of the insights from customers, but it tends to be more of a customer point of view, kind of a check-the-box. Yeah, these are customers, and yes, they do spend this amount of money, and yes, they are pretty secure. What we do from a customer due diligence standpoint is we focus on, in essence, the strength of those relationships. We want to look at customers' perceptions of the company, their growth outlook. We want to look at where the share of wallet is. How does this particular company rank? We want to look for new opportunities. What's the future spend going to be looking like as well? So again, we approach it a little bit differently. Oftentimes we work side by side with commercial due diligence providers. Frequently, we find that what our work is doing is really beginning to build the true value behind what's going on from the commercial side. So obviously getting ready for sale. And everybody knows that the first thing a CIM is supposed to do is present a great picture of why this is such a terrific, terrific company to buy. Every SIM is constructed to be a positive outlook. Customer relationships are strong, the market's expanding, our margins are great, price levels are very sustainable, lots of new innovations in our pipeline that everybody is very enthusiastic about. No competitive threats at all and no foreseeable market disruptions. Everything looks great. And of course, the very first thing that happens once that SIM is turned over to the buyer is they then begin to say, okay, how much of this is real and how much of this is sort of okay and how much of this is just off point. So again, as we know, this is where the drinking from the fire hose occurs from the seller's standpoint, when the buyers are suddenly all over every aspect of the company and every aspect of the customer relationships and trying to understand what's really going on here. Is the company's market share really expanding? What's really occurring? So our suggestion is preempt that process. In essence, take the sell side ability to begin the investigative process before a buyer is actually even involved. So what are we going to take a look at from that standpoint? Customer due diligence, basically pre-sale, is positioned as a customer satisfaction and loyalty study. Again, we want to try to understand, are those customers loyal? Are they going to be stable? If there is a transaction and I sell, are the customers that I think will stay with the company going to stay with the company? So we can make that judgment call by looking at satisfaction studies. We want to, obviously in that satisfaction study, we want it to be sponsored. We as a general rule tend to get 75 to 80% participation rate in our customer satisfaction studies. We want to look at both quantitative and qualitative insights, and Tom will walk you through what those really begin to look like when we're doing them. We're going to look at interviewing certainly a majority of the top accounts, all of the top accounts, particularly if there's concentration. And importantly, from our point of view, we say don't do this as a web survey. We know that web surveys are declining in response rate. I bet many of you have invitations to web surveys and you hit the delete button right away. This is not a web survey. This is an engaging phone conversation conducted by trained researchers who are on staff, who will have a conversation with the company's customers to understand what is the company doing well, where can they have areas of improvement. And importantly, regardless of when we're doing this, there's absolutely no mention of a sale, because we want to try to understand what's going on in that relationship. Tom mentioned it's a European standard, and much as Q of E started in Europe, Q of C, or the quality of the customer, is also certainly starting to become far more standard in Europe, and now it's starting to work its way across the pond, and we're finding that many of the most forward-thinking private equity owners of portfolio companies, as well as strategic companies, are doing this as a matter of natural course to try to understand what's going on in those relationships and to make sure that they can justify the price that they want with respect to the company itself. What does it do? The biggest advantage that it does is it minimizes the disruption. I mean, anytime you're in a buy situation, the one thing that all of the companies always experience is how much disruption this causes, any kind of diligence causes. So whether it's quality of earnings diligence, or whether it's a quality of customer diligence, or whether it's commercial diligence, suddenly everything is going on all at once. And this is a way for, in essence, our sellers to be able to try to minimize that disruption. Importantly, what it also does is it levels the playing field. Let's suppose you have multiple suitors that are going after a company. Well, they all want to talk to your customers. They all want hands-on on certain parts of the information that they think you have that they must get. So in essence, this is a great way, if you do have multiple suitors, if you are in a bidding process before you provide an LOI exclusive, this is a way for you to be able to provide information to all of those who are in pursuit, and in essence, have everybody start with the same deck, start with the same series of information about your customers. What does it do? Certainly it confirms the quality of earnings assumptions. In essence, quality of earnings is really a historic look at the financial performance of the company. And what we find is with good, solid customer due diligence, in essence, the customers provide the clarity and the color behind why the earnings were what they were. Importantly, when we do this correctly and with a forward look, we can also identify future earnings potential, which generally speaking, a quality of earnings statement won't necessarily project too far into the future. But by identifying the rank that a customer has for a given company, as well as whether they expect their spend to increase, decrease, or stay the same, and understanding what share of wallet we have with that customer, it lets us look into the looking glass of the future to say this is what's really going on with respect to the company and its historic earnings as well as its future earnings potential. What does it really let you do? Control the message. You're going to know the findings long before any potential suitor knows those findings. You're going to understand what customers really do think about your company that you are getting ready to sell. So in essence, it helps you understand, one, how loyal they are, two, where they think you ought to be going, certainly from the standpoint of looking at innovations or new product offerings. It lets you see through the eyes of the customer what's going on in the relationship. And again, we often find that many of our companies, whether they're portfolio companies or whether they're strategic companies, will often say to us, well, our salespeople talk to customers all the time. We know what they're thinking. Well, when you have a third party talking to a customer, they tend to be a lot more open. They tend to be a lot more giving about things that are working very well, and they tend to be a lot more prescriptive in their constructive criticism about areas where they think you could be improving. So in essence, you are able to control the message before somebody else hears that message before you do. So, road well traveled. Obviously, if you've got great results, perfect. That certainly helps you justify the valuation that you want to place on the company that you're getting ready to sell. But let's suppose your results are only average. Customers talk about some things that they wish you would do, innovations that unmet needs that they think you should have. Well, in essence, what that enables you to do is it enables you to set up a selling value proposition that talks about the performance going forward, as well as introducing a very believable action plan that you are already starting to put into place for where the next levels of growth and the next levels of opportunity can occur for that particular company. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Tom, and he's going to do some real-world practicalities.
Okay. All right. So some key questions about actually how you go about developing one of these studies. The first point really is it really comes down to making sure that it would meet the needs of a prospective buyer. It must be credible and thorough enough that it really answers any key questions and doesn't leave things up for doubt or for the desire for some follow-on. A few key points from a timing standpoint. There's no ideal time to do this, but I would say that probably 2 to 4 months prior to the kickoff of the sale process would be ideal. Go too much further out, people might question if things have changed since the time of the VOC. Go too close into the sale process, and it's just one more thing you're trying to keep an eye on and make sure it gets done. One element, though, to consider. These studies can take often 6 to 8 weeks, maybe a little more, depending on the number of customers to interview and how difficult they are to get on the phone. So plan accordingly. If you like the results, obviously 60 days out, well then obviously back up another 6 to 8 weeks accordingly. They can be expedited. There are firms that do this in a more quick fashion. But it really just comes down to making sure you get the right people on the phone to speak to. And in some businesses that have got customer concentration, and there's only a limited few you need to reach, sometimes it might take a bit longer. There's always 2 questions to answer in terms of how you design and scope one of these projects. Number 1 is who to talk to, and number 2 is what to ask them. Think of it this way. Again, I'm speaking more in a B2B situation. The prospective buyers will always want to ensure that the top accounts are fortified, they're secure. So I would encourage you, whether it's the top 10 or the top 20, look at the degree of concentration. How many customers make up 60, 70% of sales? Make sure you interview all of them. I would not omit any, because I've just raised questions as to why they opted not to participate. It's not uncommon that they will not all participate, because you never get 100% to do it, but at least you made the attempt to get them on board. And typical, as Kay mentioned, about 70% should do one of these. Also critical is making sure that you have the right people involved. Sometimes you get the question, well, you maybe just talk to the people that love you. What about the others? Well, the key thing here is using some objective kind of guideline. Key decision makers, head of purchasing, head of operations, whatever the key jobs are, that are the buyers, the decision makers, the user of the product or technology, and make sure they're included. And it's not uncommon to interview more than one of them to cover it. I'd also say, though, is be opportunistic. If there are some new accounts that have come on board recently that potentially shine light about new growth, interview a few of those. If there are accounts that I call them special situation accounts, they have interest in a new product or a new technology, something that you're trying to embark upon, make sure you speak to those people. Get some feedback on that new technology that is supposedly the next claim to fame. In terms of interview counts, I mean, these types of projects can vary from 25 interviews to maybe 75. We're not boiling the ocean here. It's not hundreds of interviews. But you got to make sure you do cover your bases and ensure that in the end that any prospective buyer says, yeah, you left no stone unturned. It's a very objective, fact-based study. The second is what to ask. Now, again, as Kay mentioned, if you think in the world of web surveys, it's often a 5-question quickie survey. I'd encourage, though, by doing it via the phone, it's a more in-depth discussion. There's certain things that are just paramount to cover. Assessing customer loyalty using Net Promoter Score, which I'll speak to in a minute. Understanding a business's strengths and weaknesses. What's the business known for? What's its value proposition? And where are the areas of opportunity to improve? You'll also want to make sure that you have some sense of a competitive benchmarking. Is this company preferred or not versus competition? And do that. What's the wallet share of key accounts? What's the growth outlook for customers? Of course, all key questions that play right into future earnings projections, sales projections, etc. And lastly, again, if the business is touting new innovations, new opportunities, market trends that are opportunistically in their favor, make sure you ask questions that cover those things as well. So while there's some core questions, there's also questions which you might want to script a bit, again, to play out to what the business is looking for, etc. In terms of total question count, maybe it's 30 questions plus or minus. These interviews, often 20, 30 minutes, could be a little bit more. But again, the importance is really being thoughtful in terms of the breadth of what we're speaking about. One of the elements I would absolutely encourage you to include would be a metric of customer loyalty. We mentioned here Net Promoter Score. Let me speak about the significance of this. And I'm sure many of you have heard the term NPS. Maybe some of you have used it in evaluations of businesses. For those of you that have not, let me just give a brief background. There's been a lot written in the business press, in the HBRs of the world and the Sloan reviews of the world that have linked customer loyalty and market share. It's pretty well proven that as a business improves its customer loyalty, it is likely to gain more customers, and the converse is true as well. So one of the key theses in any one of the business's selling documents is, okay, we're on a good growth track, we're going to be gaining share, we're going to be growing. Well, there's a way to confirm that or not, and that's often using the Net Promoter Score. To explain what this is, NPS was created back in 2006 by one of the senior partners at Bain & Company, Fred Reichel. And the thesis was, after looking at a number of ways of measuring satisfaction and loyalty, that most metrics were not terribly reliable and not terribly predictive of business outlook and growth. What they found, though, is that one question, how likely would you recommend company X, was a pretty reliable predictor. Asked in a very simple way, 0 to 10 scale, 10 being best, 0 being worst, but the responses fall in 3 categories. You've got 9s and 10s, those are people that are called promoters. Whatever the business has done, keep it up because they love you, they're loyal to you, they speak highly of you, they often tout you in social media, etc. The middle group, 7s and 8s, these are people that say, you're good, but there's some issues, there's some opportunity. They tend to be satisfied. Usually these customers are not at risk, although there's always a chance that a competitor might come along and kind of jump past them. But generally speaking, they're the ones that say, I like you, but some opportunities to improve things. And lastly, they're what they call detractors, people that give a 6 and below rating. These are people that are potentially at risk of leaving unless something is done to address them. They often can be difficult to service, they often spread word of mouth, etc. Now, the way you compute the NPS is you simply take all the responses, you calculate the percentage of promoters, less the percentage of detractors, and you get the score. It's an index score. And if you think about how the math works, if everyone gave you a 9 and 10, the score could be plus 100. Or conversely, if everybody gave you a detractor rating, it could be minus 100. Realistically, scores tend to fall in certain bands and categories. If I were to guess in the business-to-business world, of all the studies we do, probably the average NPS is probably 25, up about 10 points from when we began tracking this probably 5-6 years ago. What's a good score, a reputable score? Mid to high 30s, better yet 50, even better high 70s. To give you a sense for like best in class scores, Apple Computer, last time I heard, was like 82. Other retailers, you see Costco, 70, Amazon, 69. Highest insurance company, USAA, 81. So again, it's possible to get these high scores, but conversely, we've done quite a few studies where you'll see a negative score, minus 10, minus 20, minus 30. Here's the significance of it. Whether you're on the sell side or you're evaluating the buy side, scores tend to indicate share gain or loss. The higher the score, the more likely the business is to be gaining share, and the converse is true with a negative score. What's really critical here is that NPS is actually a forward-looking predictor. How likely would you recommend, which is basically saying what is your future buying intention. So it does have relevance over the next 12 to 24 months. What's key is, and this has been documented in business press, is they found is that the company with the highest NPS score in its industry would tend to outpace its peers by 2 to 3x. In other words, if the market growth rate is 3% and the company with the highest NPS could likely be growing at 9% a year. And we've seen this in several occasions. So obviously very critical. The other thing that's interesting is that NPS is not just a predictor of share gains and losses, but it can be a predictor of pricing, or at least a factor in consideration of pricing. Companies with high NPS scores are typically in a better position to sustain a price premium. They're more likely to be able to sustain challenges with margin degradation. Not always the case, but relatively speaking, they're typically in a better position because they're known to deliver better value for the money. And that's really what it comes down to. I would say, though, be wary, and we always caution whether you're on the sell or the buy side, do not rely only on Net Promoter Score. Savvy people, and there are many out there that have been around NPS, know that it's not perfect. It's a good measurement, but it's not perfect. You need to consider how the company's considered versus competition. You need to ask some other ratings questions. But presuming you can ask a combination of NPS and get some impressions, some sense of competitor benchmarking where you're compared and ranked versus others, are you preferred or not preferred, and some feedback on the customer experience, that'll give a pretty good feel when you tie it all together as to really, how the business is perceived, are there any customers at risk, what's the outlook for growth, etc. I'd also say this, which is, it's not just, of course, it's not enough to do the interviews themselves. There needs to be some distillation of the feedback. And this is something that often outside firms will hopefully bring value in doing so. So it's not just, part of it's computing the quantitative scores, but also providing some feedback. And I'm going to share an example in a minute when I talk about qualitative feedback and how it brings richness to the storyline. It's more than just numbers. It's really what people really feel about the company. Of course, what you're looking for is to share the common insights, particularly if it's obviously favorable insights, but even if it's a little less favorable, is making sure you couch it, position the right way, but bring these things forward. And then also draw some conclusions, both for the potential buyer, but also even for the portfolio companies. I'll share with you in a minute. So there's some key takeaways. The side benefit, by the way, and it's an interesting one, well, this is really being designed for sell-side due diligence. The side benefit is this could be a wonderful tool for the portfolio business, either during the remainder of the ownership or even going forward. Because what it does is it provides a great roadmap and a great playbook for how to grow. If there's any business at risk, it sure identifies it and puts it right out there in front, which they can then take action and work on. It identifies opportunities where they can gain share and grow, how they maximize their value proposition. On the good side, what's their points of difference and what do they really need to capitalize on and to differentiate themselves? And what are the improvement areas that are holding some customers back from not buying more? It will also give you good insight into pricing strategies. And lastly, if you ask the questions, it can give you some good perspective on innovation and future trends. So it can cover quite a bit. It can be a very, very rich exercise, again, not just for the buyer, but for the business that's actually having the work done on it. So what I'd like to do is bring this to life a minute and show a case study. And the case study is a project we did for a private equity firm out here in the Midwest. It was done in the spring of 2016. The PE firm was looking to sell one of its businesses that's in the carpet business. That's why we called it Carpet Inc. The company has a pretty broad network of retailers and designers, etc., and we were thoughtful and interviewed 61 different accounts. And you can see we were covering various retail stores and decorators and wholesalers and design firms. So we were thoughtful to try to make sure we got a representative sample in the various segments to which they participate. And it was kind of directionally in line with where their sales base was covered. When we do the interviews, and often many firms when they do these interviews, it'll be a combination of quantitative and qualitative. One of the key things to bring out, particularly if you're the seller, is, what's this business known for? What's it good at? And how often are people saying it? So in this case, this is a business that has a renowned product mix. 80% said it's one of their best features. Excellent in terms of customer service. Very reliable in terms of delivery. So by showing the breadth of strength, you really can bring to light that this business really, hinges on several strong fundamentals. It's nice to show the data, but what makes it more compelling is actually show the commentary. It's interesting. While charts and graphs are nice, what I think often makes it the business come to life is when you actually show what real live customers have to say. And you can see some examples here about this business being very cutting edge and having good diversity and so on and so forth. As mentioned about NPS scores, we measured this NPS score and came in at 80%, which I will tell you, the year we did this, I think was the highest score of any client we worked on. And again, considering we were very purposeful in making sure we had a good breadth of customers represented in different regions of the country, we could absolutely be very comfortable substantiating that this was a good sample, it was representative, but also it reflected the fact this business really does well. As mentioned earlier, you look at 80%, and this is a business, when it put forward its pro forma projections, was targeting double-digit growth in a market that's growing about 4%. The NPS score absolutely helped to justify and confirm that was not pie in the sky. We also, though, in the course of doing this, would also look for how this business could enhance further and improve further. Now, there were not many things that were terribly broken, but there are definitely opportunities to get even better and gain even more business. And that's one of the advantages of this type of study, is that it can confirm where there are gaps in product offering, maybe a few complaints about product quality, how they could improve their website, their portal, etc. And I reinforce this by saying is the people that gave this feedback were people that, generally speaking, are quite loyal and really like them. So it's not so much, hey, you're broken, fix something. It's more like, boy, you're good, but you could even be better if. And you see comments like this: desire for different colors and use of vibrancy and what should be updated. And oh, by the way, a little bit of complexity in your line, etc. It's kind of like I often think of these VOC exercises as a little bit of an advisory board, particularly if it's a good business. Because once you've got the high NPS and you've got a good outlook to check the box, you've got a good business to sell. But then it's a matter of how do you fine tune it to sustain it and go even better. I mentioned that it's not just about Net Promoter Score. You also want to make sure you do a competitor comparison. This is one we conducted. We would typically ask the respondent if they buy from other suppliers, and of course these retailers would buy from multiple suppliers. And then we asked them to compare the competitor, whoever they named, against the company Carpet Inc. And while I won't go through all the machinations of the charting, the point being made here is where you see green, it means that this company, Carpet Inc., is superior and preferred over other suppliers. And that was basically the message, the storyline, which was you really line up this company, this manufacturer versus others, whether it's on quality, on account support, on marketing support, hands down it was superior. That makes for a powerful statement. And that really helps to substantiate and back up that it wasn't just luck that they got this great NPS score. There really was something to it. Now, what this organization did and what this PE firm did, I thought was really smart, was they, rather than just focus on how they do today, they used the voice of the customer exercise to investigate 4 different growth opportunities. Now, these opportunities were known by Carpet Inc. This is not just pulling ideas out of the sky, but what they did was we decided to put a fair amount of the research into validating and confirming the demand and interest in these 4 categories you see listed: pre-made rugs, fabricated, light commercial patterned nylon. Don't worry, I will not bore you with all the responses, but I wanted to share with you just one example of how it can be done extremely effectively. So one of the 4 categories was pattern nylon. And so we simply, and this is obviously within the trade, a fairly well-known category. And so we asked these customers, is this a growing category for you? Well, sure it is. As you can see from the pie chart, you've got about 75% that are saying, yes, absolutely, it's an area of either high or at least moderate growth. And then, of course, you show some of the quotations, which bring it to life, like it's gangbusters, et cetera. So we got some sense it's a good opportunity as a market. And then we basically shared that this company is looking to expand in the category, and they'd introduced some new products, and what were you thinking of their product offering? And the general gist of it is that the majority, 57%, said they're on the right track. They've got a good offering out there. So here we know we got a market that's growing. Carpet Inc. has been dabbling in this category, and the emphasis at the time we did this was dabbling, and the feedback is pretty encouraging and positive. Of course, we then go on and ask for any advice the customers have. Now, again, the VOC serves several purposes. One is, for the prospective buyer, is this a good company to buy? But also for the portfolio company, hey, while I got you on the phone, give me some advice on what to do with this category. And sure enough, customers are more than happy to share their pearls of wisdom on what to do and how to grow. And so we capture this. So again, this is one example of the 4. I'll tell you, of the 4 categories we investigated, 2 of them were proverbial home runs. One of them was a solid double, and one is honestly a strikeout. But that's fine. I mean, what was nice was that the base business, the legacy core business, with an NPS of 80, indicated this business would continue to grow above the market growth rate. But in addition, there were new categories they could get into, which were validated by the research, which made the argument there's even additional growth above and beyond the core business. So needless to say, painted a very favorable, positive picture. The back end of these studies, typically there will be a synopsis for the potential investor about what our opinion is of the business in terms of its market growth, its positioning, share, outlook for growth, etc. But we'll also include narrative in terms of where the opportunities are to keep improving. Now, to be honest, this is as much for the portfolio business as it is for the prospective buyer, but I'll say this. Savvy buyers, particularly the PE firms, will use this document as a way to jumpstart and make sure they're focused on the right things post-close. So think of this as almost a nice transition, nice handoff from the potential buyer to potential seller. So with that, I'm going to stop to take some questions. Zach, what do you got?
Okay, so we have a question on how are interviews positioned so that the potential for sale remains confidential. It's positioned as a satisfaction and loyalty study. We never mention any kind of transaction, so certainly from that standpoint, as far as the researchers are concerned and as far as customers are concerned, as Tom described in the case of Carpet Inc., we were looking to try to validate how the company was performing through the eyes of the customer, as well as what new product innovations would be most desirable. So again, all of that is because this is done before any real market knowledge is out about the potential sale itself. There really isn't anything to necessarily be overly worried about.
Another question. Comment made. We have seen promoters still walk away post-close. Can this be used to help prevent this from future deals? Interesting. As I read that question, it does trigger. I've occasionally seen that happen where there's a promoter that actually walked. But I would say that's by rare exception. The trick I would tell you is if the interview is done well and there was enough exploratory discussion beyond that, I bet the reasons for that would have come up. Potentially may have been a different technology, or potentially a competitor coming with an entirely different offering that just swept them away. But that type of feedback would, again, with thoughtful questioning and particularly a little bit of probing, would be discovered during a good VOC exercise. But that's a good question. Good.
We have another question about how does B2B approach differ from a B2C approach? As you might suspect, since we are shooting for talking to customers that are responsible for a good portion of the company's revenue, we are asking the company to actually put together the contact list of people who would be interviewed. And that list of contacts is what enables us to reach out to them to conduct the interview itself. If the company has a direct-to-consumer relationship, it could be done through e-commerce, it could be done through any kind of situation where they have warranty information or they have contact information, it does enable us to be able to reach into the consumer side of their business model. But as a general rule, we often find that those results will be probably a little bit less. Consumers have a little less vested interest to talk to us about a given company than the actual purchaser themselves in a B2B relationship.
All right, another one. This is a question about the people you'd like to interview. What's the ideal mix of decision maker interviews versus end user interviews? It really depends. It depends on the type of business and the type of decision making that goes on. I would say, from the perspective of making sure you cover your bases with so a seller finds it credible, make sure you're getting at least one key decision maker at every major account. That said, though, in some businesses, it could be potentially, if it's a technical product, technology, it might be an engineer or someone in another area plus purchasing. So there may be a need for multiple. I think it really depends. It all comes down to what your objective is in this. If it's strictly to make the argument that relationships are secure, it may be just really being more narrow with decision makers. If it's to get a little more of a robust understanding of the business relationships, you could definitely see yourself including some, users, end users, more day-to-day contacts, etc.
I'm going to take this one on. Do you differentiate between operational and relationship metrics and scores? Absolutely. Operational metrics would be anything along the lines of, for instance, quality, lead time, on-time delivery in full. Certainly operational issue from the standpoint of looking at how invoicing is handled or customer services is handling the request for quotes. When we look at relationship metrics, yes, we certainly will look at who does the company's customers view as their primary contact? What kind of relationship does he or she have? How do they perform? Is the company engaged? Do they understand the customer's business? Are they a partner to the customer, or are they just a vendor supplying reasonable product on time and in full? So when we look at an ultimate relationship question is, we all know that businesses will always, every business on the globe is going to have a problem at some point in time. The question becomes, how do you handle the problem? And we've had customers who've told us after a huge recall that they would be a customer for life of the company just because of the way they handled the recall. So that problem resolution will definitely tie to a Net Promoter Score concept as well. So it's a way for us to look at, again, this triangulation of what's going on in the relationship.
All right, another question. Good one. What are examples of questions to ask to get a competitor benchmarking? Good question. Two immediately come to mind. One is, you simply can ask the NPS question about the competitor. If they're willing to name the competitor, or maybe competitors, go through the exercise to try to find out what the NPS score is and compare it against what your company's NPS score is. That's one option. A simpler one is simply to ask the question, how does this company rank versus alternatives? Find out how many suppliers they buy from or service by, and say, this company, do you see them as first, second, third? And what I mean by rank is, it's not about wallet share, it's about preference. Who do they like working with the most? Who do they prefer to go with? Whether you use NPS or you use rank, the key thing to understand is, beyond the kind of the answer, the quantitative or ranking answer, it's the question of why. If they prefer your company over the competition, why? Understand that. That's effectively your point of competitive advantage. Alternatively, if the other company is preferred, you want to understand where you're deficient, because that's in effect what you need to focus on to kind of close the gap and hopefully at some point overtake them. So it's a really, make sure if you're going to ask it, it's a two-part question, capture a score, capture a ranking, but then ask the questions why preferred or why not preferred. So, anyway.
Interesting question here. How do you handle a situation where we want to buy out a competitor? How do you prevent the calls from being leaked? Well, the competitive benchmarking section will give you a good ability to understand how the competitor is doing compared to your company. So this is particularly useful if you have customers who are buying from both your company as well as a competitive company. So looking at it through that lens lets you see, in many cases, it helps us identify a competitive company that might be a logical target for acquisition. From the standpoint of the calls being leaked, given that we're calling the company's customers as a part of satisfaction and loyalty, and we have a follow-up plan for the company to reach back out to those customers to thank them and to identify a couple of key issues that they're going to be working on based on customer input. It's generally treated as it is what it is. It's a study that they are trying to use to help them become better performers for me, the customer. So again, we're not looking for any kind of leakage as per se, as much as just trying to identify customer satisfaction and customer experience studies are now becoming far more commonplace in the B2B world. So customers generally, one, are pleased to be invited, and two, are generally speaking very enthusiastic about providing feedback. So again, they'll take it at face value, and that leakage issue doesn't necessarily even apply in their mind.
Cool. Another question. Do you ask sellers to contact customers before the interview? And also, how do you make sure the account managers aren't telling them what to provide positive feedback? The first answer is yes, definitely. What we actually provide, we give the seller a letter or an email announcement to send to customers to alert them that you're conducting a customer satisfaction survey and you've hired a third-party firm. That absolutely increases participation rates and gives them some comfort, the respondents some comfort to share their feedback. In terms of an account manager kind of trying to cook the books and get some favorable content, I got to be honest with you, I've been at this, I don't know, too many years with too many of these studies, and I've heard of it being concerned, but I've never actually seen it done. And even if it was done, I think we could quickly cut through it, because the number of questions we ask and the subtlety and the kind of the finesse we ask them would quickly uncover if someone's BSing us. For example, this often happens if you ask about pricing. Someone will say, how's a person's pricing? And they'll say, oh, it's always too high, you got to drop it. But again, we can cut through a lot of that. But I'd say in general, these studies happen pretty quickly, pretty effectively. It's positioned as customer satisfaction. We encourage it to communicate it as such. It's meant to be a win-win. And that usually paves the way for a productive exercise. So anyway.
How has customer diligence evolved over the past 5 years? Is it becoming more common? Absolutely, becoming more common. One of the things that we see, again, the European model tended to have the buy-side element first, and they were using that over the course of probably really the last 5 to 10 years. Over the course of the last 5 years, leading private equity companies have viewed this as a really robust tool. So in essence, we are seeing quite an uptick on the buy side, and now quite an uptick on, hey, I can use this also as a selling tool. We had one company that, for instance, had been tracking their scores, performance scores, over the course of actually 5 years. And when they were getting ready to sell, they sold the brand name on the condition that the buyer would continue to measure the Net Promoter Score and this customer satisfaction. And if it dropped below the level that the company had attained, then he was going to remove their use of his brand name because he didn't want it to be tainted. So, over the course of time, it's a very robust tool. Certainly can be used from a portfolio management standpoint. Operationally, it identifies things to focus on. And we're just finding that across the board, everyone is saying, hey, this just makes a lot of sense. It gives us a window into how we're doing health check, and it gives us a window into what do we need to do from a future standpoint to grow and be more profitable and prosper.
Okay. All right, I think that ends the questioning, and we're going to give the remaining time back to you. Thank you very much for your participation, your interest, and very good questions. If there's any additional questions or comments, obviously you can feel free to email us or give us a call. But thank you very much for your time. It's been a nice afternoon.
Thank you.